Hello and welcome to Politics London. Coming up, after the tragic murder of Tillpapara, is the public losing trust in the Metropolitan Police?
I'm walking down the street, I'm not going to ask the police officer for help.
And the ongoing issue of homeowners blighted by the cladding crisis and left with worthless and unsafe properties.
I'm stuck in a building that potentially could set alight and a blaze could run all the way through it within a moment.
Good morning, great to have you with us for the programme. I'm joined for the duration of the show by Felicity Button, Conservative MP for Kensington, and Bangla, anti-Labour MP for Streatham. A very warm welcome to you both. I'm glad you both got the colour coding memo. We're all matching. Well, if you want to join in the conversation at home, do follow us as ever at BBC. Now, I want to start with the sad news of the MP for Old Exley and Sidcup, James Brokenshire, has died after a battle with lung cancer. Mr Brokenshire was formerly Secretary of State for Northern Ireland and Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government. James was a regular guest on the programme. Felicity, I know that you knew him well. Your thoughts today?
Well, I am devastated by the news. James was one of the kindest and most professional politicians. He was so kind and supportive towards me when I entered Parliament, and my thoughts are with his wife and his children. It's just way too
Felicity, thank you, Val. I know that you also knew James.
Yes, definitely didn't know him as well, but had some dealings with him in the past years as political advisor. And it's really tragic news for a colleague, and heart goes out to his family.
Okay, Val, thank you. Now, an innovative scheme that takes knives off the capital streets and melts them down to create outdoor gyms in London's parks. Our reporter Jessica Ewer has more.
It's the cutting-edge sport that's transforming lives in London. This gym in Lambeth was built by steel warriors. They collect knives from the street and use the steel to build lives rather than take them.
Well, I've travelled all over the world. The World Championships was in New York.
I won 37 pro comps internationally.
Represented and won something in every competition that we've taken part in. So steel warriors collect these knives and then they melt them down and create these bar parks. So right now we have 3 different parks.
All the gyms are built in neutral gang zones, so visitors feel safe.
I mean, for me personally, it's changed my life. I lost my job. I was going through a bit of a low point in my life until I came across the guys here.
I wanted to find a way to channel my energy into something else rather than being on the streets of London. Being adopted twice, being kicked out of school, jail, nearly.
I didn't want to be a target for bullying when I was going into secondary school. Didn't want to repeat basically primary, but it helped me stop being a target, because instead of just being the small, skinny kid that people can put school trays on their head and tell to walk, I became an inspiration to those around me.
I'm no longer the bad kid on the block. I'm literally a respected person in the community. I can now not look over my shoulders thinking, oh, someone's out to get me. Like, I'm now knowing that it's like,
Everyone is welcome here.
The parents will just leave their kids to come into the park whilst they sit down and have a picnic, because it's such a welcoming environment.
It's such an empowering feeling. I think women would be surprised how great it feels to do calisthenics and to learn the skills.
The charity had secured funding for more gyms, but its main sponsors, Co-op, pulled out after COVID.
So this is a growing sport and we have growing athletes and we need them to be training year round. So having it in the facility would be amazing for them with some added funding. Places like indoor facilities will just mean so much more to the community as well. So I think that's one thing we would love to see.
These athletes are going from strength to strength, but can they get the funding to keep sharpening their skills?
Pretty impressive impressive stuff, I'm sure you'll agree. Well, joining us is Simone Ming, who was the first Lambeth coach for Steel Warriors. Simone, welcome to you. Thanks very much for being with us. Tell us what kind of impact Steel Warriors has on the community.
Well, what I have found is that how why I was working from four age groups. The youngest person that has come to one of our classes is 5 years old, and the oldest is between 60 and 70. So the different people that come into the classes that come in responsibilities is amazing.
And why do you think that schemes like this, like Steel Warriors, can reduce knife crime?
It gives people something to do. It gives them a community to work with. Just see the community focus really promotes the health and discipline and mental strength that you have to use when it comes to physical exercising, and especially the dedication it takes to be able to build all the skills needed.
Apologies to our viewers, the sound connection isn't great, but we're going to keep going, Simone, because we're joined by two politicians today, as you know. What do you want to say to them? What support would you like them to give from the government in particular?
We'll definitely like a few more parks open for that has the warriors, especially in London and around the UK. It has given loads of people a different outlet. Especially when they haven't got that outlet anywhere else, it's definitely something that helps them to release some energy, and it would be really great to have some more facilities around the UK.
Felicity, Steel Warriors is a grassroots campaign, as you saw that. I mean, we know that funding across the board has been cut to youth services, and we've heard time and again that this has led to more violence on the streets, more knife crime. What would you say to Simone and others who are involved in grassroots campaigns like this?
Well, first of all, I would say, Simone, what a fantastic charity. I think when we were watching the film, we all just thought, wow, that's amazing. It's a great initiative. And I have many charities in my constituency which also do great work with youth. The Harrow Club, Rugby Portobello Trust, to name but a few. Core spending power of councils is actually going up in 2021-22 by 4.5%. But I feel it is very, very important that we focus on our young people, because we need to get that right, because that is the foundation for their lives in the future.
Val, is this the right kind of scheme to help tackle knife crime?
Absolutely, I think it is. It's really great that Steel Warriors has the site in Lambeth, and where Simone's come from. I think that's fantastic. However, I'm really, really disappointed in the amount of funding that's being given to youth services overall. As you mentioned at the beginning, the government cut this level of funding massively, and the increase they're giving through councils is simply not going to be enough. You're absolutely right, Felicity. We should be investing in young people, but it doesn't seem like the government's core focus if the cuts are this deep and nothing's being done to replenish them. Young people are just being left to their own devices without all of these different schemes that we know through evidence make a difference.
It's not just down to councils, is it?
Well, the government is very, very supportive of young people. We are making, for instance, education one of our key drivers in terms of the levelling up agenda. And if you listen to the Prime Minister at the Conservative Party conference, his big message was young people across the country have got the same talent, but they need the same opportunity, and we are committed to delivering that.
Simone, do you feel like this government's committed to young people in this country, in London?
Well, I really hope so, because it's the young people that are the future, and if they don't have the support needed, then their future's going to be limited to the things that they can do. So I really hope that they do more for the youngsters.
Oh, Ming, great to have you on the programme. Coach there for Steel Warriors, thank you. The Home Secretary has announced an inquiry into the systemic failures of the Metropolitan Police regarding Wayne Couzens, the officer convicted of raping and murdering Sarah Everard earlier this year. The inquiry will also examine the Met's wider policies and procedures. Helen Price reports.
It's now believed that Sarah Everard's killer, Wayne Couzens, was in a WhatsApp group with 5 other police officers, including 3 from the Met, who allegedly shared abusive, misogynistic and homophobic content. The Met faces questions over 2 previous allegations of indecent exposure. This week, another Met officer was charged with rape. 26 Met officers have been convicted of sex crimes since 2016, including rape and sharing indecent images of children. This summer, 2 Met officers pleaded guilty to misconduct charges after taking selfies with the bodies of murdered sisters Bieber Henry and Nicole Smallman and sharing them in a police WhatsApp group. Scotland Yard has also faced heavy criticism over the alleged heavy-handed policing of the Sarah Everard vigil at Clapham Common, where women were pinned to the ground and handcuffed. After it emerged last month that Wayne Couzens staged a fake arrest to trap Sarah Everard, the Met were accused of being tone deaf for advising women to flag down a passing bus if they were stopped by a lone plainclothes police officer.
Do you trust the police? No. Their job is to protect us. They're not doing that. So if I'm walking down the street, I'm not going to ask a police officer for help.
Events have raised questions around public trust in the police, who polices the police, and whether the incumbent Commissioner Cressida Dick is the right person to oversee reforms.
We're joined now by Alice Vinton, a former officer at the Metropolitan Police. Alice, welcome to you. Thanks very much for being with us. So you spent 11 years in the Metropolitan Police Force. Did you witness sexist behaviour and attitudes?
Yeah, I certainly did. I think I wasn't subject to any severe sexual harassment or sexual abuse like other officers have been, but I have seen a range from example, things that you might see as quite small, such as eating a banana in the canteen, and you would get comments about it, what it looked like you were doing. They would call female officers Dorothys quite a lot. I've been on a police carrier where pornography, quite hardcore pornography, has been shown on police officers' phones. I was the only female on that bus. I think you've got things like that which really make women feel uncomfortable. And then you go prior to where this sexism and misogyny really affects your career. I've had experiences where I haven't applied for jobs that I wanted because I've essentially been told that it would be a waste of a position because I was part-time after having children. And I've also had a police sergeant that I was speaking to refer to me as a maternity case and basically say that you can hope someone else would apply for the role because he didn't want a part-timer on his team. So there's just a plethora of things that happen to officers, and I do appreciate that I left there in 2015, but I'm still hearing from current female officers that these things are happening still in the police force.
And did you ever feel able to speak out, to take these issues to your superiors?
Well, no, I didn't, and this is something that I am ashamed about now. I wish I had spoken out about it at the time, but I really did feel that I would be ostracised by the team. I'd seen it happen before. I'd seen pretty much anyone who complained about another officer, they were seen as disloyal, kind of betraying your family almost. It wasn't encouraged. It was never encouraged. It was kind of like a them and us attitude. Your job. This is your family, and I think that's a really, really damaging attitude to have. It can be very useful at times when you need backup, when you need someone to physically help you. That mentality, that family closeness can be really useful, but where it's dangerous is you would do anything to protect your family, and you shouldn't be seeing your colleagues as family in that regard. If they're inappropriate and if you're worried about them, people should feel able to speak up.
And what you're talking about is awful. It's misogynistic, it's sexist behaviour. Do you, or did you ever feel that this could seriously affect how officers tackle violence against women?
Absolutely. I think there's a definite link between misogyny and then offending itself and the way that you see women. If you disrespect women, if you believe misogynistic myths about sex attacks, then you blame women, you victim blame. And there's no way that it can't be linked. If you're a sexist, you will not treat women the same.
What specific actions do you think should happen now to tackle this culture within the Met?
I think lots of things need to change. I think that women should be encouraged to speak up. I think all officers should be encouraged to speak up. I think right from the start, right from training school, it should be seen as a positive thing. People should be encouraged for speaking up against fellow officers, because essentially one bad police officer makes all police officers look bad, and that's really the message that needs to be kind of drummed into new recruits. And also women having maybe a female senior officer that they can confide in, that they can speak to, and tackling this kind of really inappropriate kind of laddish culture that still does exist in a lot of police forces.
Okay, thank you, Alice. Well, what you've heard, not just from Alice, but obviously over the past few weeks as well, do you still have faith in the Met?
No, I don't, and a lot of my constituents do not, and it's really bad because there are some good officers, but you know, as has rightly been said, when police officers behave like this, it makes the entire force look bad, and you have to understand now why women don't have that confidence, and the responses that we've had since then, in the report earlier that we should flag down buses, and even one officer saying that Sarah Everard should have thought more about whether or not she got into the car. All of that gaslighting is nothing to help improve the issue of violence against women. And actually this review or this inquiry that's been launched focusing on Wayne Couzens so heavily gives the impression that, you know, there's one bad apple. But when you hear figures like 52% of officers found guilty of sexual misconduct between 2016 and 2020 were allowed to keep their jobs, it's more than about one person. There's clearly an institutional problem in the Met and needs to be done to solve.
Felicity, Boris Johnson said this week the police do a wonderful, wonderful job and can be trusted by the public. Do you agree with them?
Well, first of all, I would like to say that I'm delighted that the Home Secretary has commissioned this independent report, because it is very, very important that the police maintain the highest standards of conduct and professionalism, and it is also vitally important that women and girls are protected against violence and that they feel safe on our streets. Now, I do think that there are so many police officers out there who do a very, very good job, and I look at my own PCU and they do a good job, but we need to ensure that that is universal within the Met, that every officer is doing a good job, and I will hold the Met to account on that. And what is also very important is that when we do get the results of this independent review, that they are not pushed into the long grass, that we do learn from mistakes and we implement changes.
Alice, what's your view? Is this independent review enough? Should it be a statutory inquiry that could compel witnesses?
I think it's a good start. I think it's really important to actually define what Wayne Couzens had done, what he'd been accused of, what opportunities may have been missed. I think that's really, really important. But I think what I would really like to happen, and I think what a lot of people would like to happen, is a public inquiry, something that looks not just at the Wayne Couzens case, but misogyny in the force in general and domestic abuse within the force. I think what's really important to point out about any statistics, and the statistics that were mentioned earlier, is they are always the tip of the iceberg. So these reported officers, these officers that are found out to have done these things mentioned earlier, they are the tip of the iceberg. You've got to think about all these women who would never report a police officer because of the fear around that and because of the power the police officers have.
And Alice, what about the person that sits at the top of the Met? Lots of discussion about whether Cressida Dick is the right person to oversee this and push change and reform that's so badly needed through. What's your view?
I think that Cressida Dick is respected by a lot of people in the police. That's what I've heard. I think she's got good support from the troops on the ground, which is really important. And I also know that she has put in place lots of policies to encourage women to move up the ranks, to improve things like maternity leave and work-life balance. I think all of those things are very, very positive. So I don't necessarily think she should resign. I think what she should do is stand up and say, listen, we are listening to you, we do believe you, and we are going to dig into this, and we are going to start training our male officers, because this is a gendered problem. And we are going to train our male officers to really appreciate what their language, what their actions, how they affect their female colleagues.
Okay, Alice Vinton, thank you very much for joining us and telling us about your experiences and your thoughts on this. Thank you. In the 4 years since the Grenfell Tower fire, thousands of Londoners have discovered their own blocks of flats are not safe, often built with the same combustible cladding as Grenfell. Urgent work is needed to make people's homes safe. While some of that work is being funded by the government, many are being asked to foot the bill themselves. Residents in one South London apartment block found out just how much that might cost them. This from our reporter Helen.
What's your favourite thing about this flat?
It's just the right size. It's not like too big and it's not too small.
The McGoverns own just under half this flat as part of a shared ownership scheme with a mortgage of £120,000. Emma is a primary school teacher with a modest salary, and yet last week
The whole amount they're asking for this block, just over £2.5 million.
a letter from her housing association telling her the cost of work to make her building fire safe, which works out at £85,000 for each flat.
Well, I sort of went from being a bit nervous about it to just thinking it's just crazy, isn't it? I don't know anyone who can provide that. You know, our family don't have that sort of money. Our friends don't have that sort of money. I don't think many people do these days. This block is lots of key workers, lots of teachers like myself, lots of nurses, there's people who work for the council.
Her home is Oyster Court in Southwark, which is entirely shared ownership.
The building is 5 stories high and crucially under 18 metres, which means it's not eligible for any of the government's £5 billion bailout for high-rise buildings with combustible cladding. But this one just here, right next to it, is that little bit taller and means potentially they can get the funding.
And we get nothing. We have to somehow find 85,000 to pay for the work that needs to be done.
Liam Spragley bought a 25% share of his flat here for just over £70,000.
I mean, it's heartbreaking. I've watched the area change dramatically. I've watched huge new buildings come up and have an effect on my house price, and then to know that it's basically been eradicated and that I'm stuck. I'm stuck in a building that potentially could set alight and a blaze could run all the way through it within a moment, and that I would lose everything.
The government told us building owners should make buildings safe without passing on costs to leaseholders, and they're introducing new measures that will legally require building owners to prove they've tried all routes. The Housing Association Optivo told us will only pass costs to leaseholders as a last resort if all other options have been exhausted, and they will continue to lobby the government to protect leaseholders from the costs.
Can't quite see the balcony from here. It's a dark wood one there, actually. It's good to make it out.
The area's MP used to live in the taller neighbouring block and says the responsibility sits with the government.
This is a problem of the government's creation. The government didn't regulate the materials being used properly. The government changed the rules retrospectively on what could be used. The government is imposing these changes of costs. The government promised it would protect leaseholders, and the government needs to deliver on that promise. I know some of the people affected. I've done casework and been a neighbour when I lived in this was the address on the ballot paper that I stood on in 2015. So it's very sad that this has come so close to home.
Despite being shared ownership, the fire safety work isn't shared. Oyster Court's residents are liable for all the work. If they could have another roll of the dice, many would never have bought these flats.
Well, Felicity, it seems pretty simple. Why can't the government just stop allowing these companies to pass on these extortionate costs to those who own these properties?
I would say a number of things. First of all, just going back to the report, I want to make it very clear that it is governments of all political hues who over the decades have been responsible for our building regulation. And clearly, it is not up to scratch, and that is what we are doing with the Building Safety Bill.
But right now, it's this government who are making the rules as far as planning is concerned.
So let me move on to what is happening at the moment. There is no question that it should be developers, freeholders, insurance companies, warranty givers who should pay for these costs. And it should not be the responsibility of leaseholders and taxpayers when the taxpayer is providing £5 million for high-rise buildings, which is a huge amount of money. Now, what is very important in intermediate buildings, 11 to 18 metres, that we take a proportionate risk-based approach to these buildings. Many of them will not need remediation provide subsidised financing to remediate those buildings so that no leaseholder will have to pay more than £50 per month for the remediation. But we do now have a new Secretary of State, things are being reviewed. I personally would like to look at potentially changing that very subsidised financing into a grant for these leaseholders, because there is no
grant they wouldn't have to pay back, so that it would be paid for them. You would lobby the Secretary
I would like to look at that, yes, because there's no question that leaseholders, it's not their fault. They bought these buildings or flats and buildings in good faith, but that is something that is being reviewed by the Secretary of State. Not my idea, that's my idea, but I do think that we should be considering that, and obviously we do have the building safety bill.
It's just not good. I just don't see why after promise that the government have put forward that anybody is being put in that position. What we have to realise is not just the specific measures of the cladding. Now that people are beginning to look at safety issues, a lot of other issues have been brought up in terms of safety within these blocks. So we're finding a lot of residents having to pay through the nose for a range of different issues. 18 metres is an arbitrary number as far as I'm concerned. If the cladding is flammable, it has to be removed, and the government have to pay for that. And they've missed so many chances over the 11 years they've been in power. Let's be clear, that's 11 years of the Conservative-led government where they could have at times put certain measures in place. But what do we expect when £1 in every £5 of money donated to the Conservative Party comes from property developers?
I want to come back on a couple of points there. First of all, the 18 metres was not an arbitrary number. That was what was recommended by fire safety and building experts. Dame Judith Hackett, for instance, because the risk of death goes up substantially in buildings over 18 metres. So we were taking advice. When we said that, we were taking advice from experts.
And I did say that anybody in a building with flammable cladding would have that cladding removed, and there would be no cost to leaseholders. That's what the government said. So why are they coming good on that promise? They've said it repeatedly, I might add.
So we do have this subsidised financing scheme. Clearly we do need more details on that. As I say, I do think how we solve cladding is being reviewed at the moment, and it clearly is.
Why taking so long? Why are so many people under so much stress in fear of losing tens of thousands of pounds and properties that have become violent?
Well, there's another point to this, and I'm glad that you've raised this. One thing is just getting the property market moving, because there are lots of buildings that are most likely safe that have not been able to be sold by virtue of the fact that they haven't been able to get EWS1 forms, which is a technical term, but effectively it means that you can get a mortgage. Now, government has been working incredibly hard on this, and we are solving these problems.
We're out of time. Belle, apologies. We will be, of course, returning to this issue, I'm sure, time and again. Thank you. Well, that is all we have time for this week. My thanks to my guests, to Felicity and to Belle. Great to see you. I do hope you join us again next Sunday. Thanks for watching.
Videos